gorgeous and sexy creature. Welcome back to Practice Intimacy. This is the place to be to learn all about love, sex, and how to have the best relationships you possibly can. My name is Jami Lynn. I'm a marriage and family therapist in the Austin area, and I am starting finally to talk about sex more on this channel. I am very excited about it. I'm a little nervous. I have been avoiding this topic mainly because I was kind of buying into all the shame messages that we get in Western culture, particularly in the US where I live. And I'm not going to buy it anymore because inside I don't actually feel shame around sexuality. Inside I feel the sacredness of it, the joy and pleasure that is possible, and really just the pure natural nature. Natural nature. That was a hard one. The pure reality that sex is a part of life. It is a natural part of life. It is a healthy part of life when we're educated about it. And the thing that keeps us from being educated is shame. There's a taboo around sexuality, partly because different religions have said that sex is a sin unless you're doing it in very specific ways, which most people don't actually do because it's really hard not to listen to your body's natural drive to be sexual. And what it's caused is just a really repressed culture where people cannot, or actually more do not know how to have sex in ways that are positive for them, positive for their partners. And so let's start working on that together. It all starts with you whenever you really work on your relationship with sexuality, including how to have a sexual experience that is aligned with your highest values and your interest in health, because there are healthy ways to have sex, there are unhealthy ways to have sex. And so finding what really, really aligns with you is the key. And I'm hoping today to share with you the model that I like best. This is the model I wish I would have learned in high school rather than what I was taught, which was incredibly fear-based and abstinence-based education, because I live in Texas. Hello. What I wish I would have been taught instead is Doug Braun-Harvey's 6 sexual principles. And Doug Braun-Harvey, he is a therapist. He is someone who really works with men in particular. He's led a lot of groups for men, and he worked with out-of-control sexual behavior for a very long time. He's one of the best therapists, I think, in the world, working with that particular issue where somebody feels like they're using sex, using porn in a way that does not match with what they want. But Doug Braun-Harvey came up with these 6 sexual principles, and I think it's brilliant. So we're going to go through them. I'm going to try and make it quick, but I also do not want to leave out the nuance. So let me just list them first, and then we'll dive in. The 6 sexual principles are consent, non-exploitation, protection from unwanted pregnancy and STIs, honesty, shared values, and pleasure. So Doug was the first person I ever heard say this, but it's brilliant. Sexual health is the balance between safety and pleasure. The reason I think that's brilliant is because when we lean too far into safety, we start moving into a fear space that can forget the reality that sex is pleasurable. The reason why most people are going to choose to have sex is because it feels good. And so if you lean too far into the safety, you can scare people and forget about pleasure. And then you end up with the kind of repressed culture that is seeking pleasure in ways that maybe are not the healthiest because they were not taught how to seek pleasure in healthy ways. And then on the other side, if you lean too far into the pleasure sphere and you forget about safety, people can get hurt. I'm thinking about in my mind, I'm thinking of them as cults, but different groups that have sold like super sex positive experiences where you come and you learn your sexuality and maybe you get to have experiences with other people. And then it ends up being issues with consent violations, issues with lack of protection, lack of conversations about how to protect yourself and others. A good example of this would be the One Touch. No, is that right? Shoot, now I can't remember. I think it was One Touch. There was a community that was recently closed down because they realized that As you moved through working with this particular group, they use coercion and other things to try and make people have sex, which is not okay. And so there's a real problem if you lean too far into the pleasure as well. Leaning too far either direction is not health. Health is finding balance between safety and pleasure. And so Doug Braun-Harvey's 6 principles really focus on that. The first 5 principles are all about safety, and then the last principle is about pleasure. And that is actually balance, because pleasure is big. It is huge inside of our bodies. It is a really innate force that is going to drive you to go be sexual. And all the safety stuff is something that you have to learn. There's more to it than just feeling pleasure, at least for most of us. Some people actually struggle with the pleasure piece, but that's a different conversation. Most people, they're going to have an innate drive to go look for the pleasurable side of sex. And the safety side is what they're going to have to learn. And so there's more going on the safety side that we're going to talk about today. Let's start with consent, because consent is number 1. Consent is always first whenever it comes to safety. And consent is about really clearly knowing, here's what we're going to do together. Does that sound good to you? Does all of that sound good to you? And if there's any part that doesn't, tell me, because I'm not interested in doing that if you're not. So consent is about clearly defining, here's what we're going to do together. And then getting a definite yes. Sometimes I think about this as an enthusiastic yes. I absolutely want to do these things that we've talked about with you, and I want to do it now. There's a range of consent from no, I'm not interested in that, to maybe, I might be open to that if we talk about it more, if we change some things, to yes. And when it comes to consent, the reason I say enthusiastic yes is if a person's not fully interested, if there's a little bit of a no or a maybe behind their yes, then you need to do more exploring to find out what's going to make them actually comfortable. And I've had many couples, and also just in giving talks, I've had many people ask about, like, what if it's not an enthusiastic yes for me to be sexual? We've been married for a long time. Sometimes I say yes just to make my marriage happy. And there's a fine line here. So if you're saying yes because you want to be in good relationship with a person you care about, you know that sex is something that is important in your relationship, and in saying yes, there's no harm caused to you, and even maybe a little bit of pleasure and joy out of the connection experience. Maybe not a body pleasure, but the connection feels good. If it's like, yes, all of that is what I'm saying yes to, and sex is included in that, okay, awesome. That feels like consent to me. If you were saying yes to sex just because your partner is going to be upset if you do not say yes, I actually don't think that is consent. If you are saying yes when really inside it feels like a no, that's not consent. That's a boundary violation on your side. You're violating your own boundary by saying yes when really it's a no. And the question for you to ask yourself would be, what do I need in order to actually be able to have sex in a way that feels good to me? To say yes and it be true and authentic and even enthusiastic. And that's tender and hard for some people to hear, especially if you've been in a marriage for a long time and you're realizing for the first time, oh, I haven't actually been fully consenting to this. Not inside. Maybe I'm saying yes, but inside it's actually a no. And that can be hard to, 1, discover, and 2, now live the truth. The truth being healthier boundaries around, I'm only going to say yes when I want it, and I will say no otherwise. If that feels scary or hard, consider watching some of my boundary videos, and then maybe even check out my course, Boundaries Create Your Peace, because that is hard work, but it's necessary in order to protect. It's really about protecting your soul and even protecting your relationship. most partners are not interested in sex if the person's not actually into it. It's not true for everyone, unfortunately, but for most partners, that would be true. And so finding what would actually create consent and a yes is the next step for you. One more word about consent, maybe a couple more words, because consent is so important. So coercion means that you're not actually getting consent. Coercion is pushing to try and continue pushing to try and get the thing that you want. So if somebody says no and you keep touching them and keep saying like, come on, this will be fun, you know you want it. Or if they say no and you get grouchy and moody and you punish them with like coldness or anger, all of that is coercive behavior. And if somebody says yes to get you to stop coercing them, that is not actually consent. And so something to be aware of inside yourself is, am I being coercive? And I will say it's not only guys who do this. In our culture, yes, men in particular have been taught to try and keep pushing the boundary. I'm thinking of the movie Grease, when casually in a song, they're like, did she put up a fight to having sex with you? Our culture has some real serious issues with consent. And it makes me real mad. But that's one example of how men have been taught that you're supposed to just keep trying if the woman says, no, I don't want to have sex. But anyone can be coercive. I used to be coercive in my relationship. The way it showed up in my relationship is if my partner did not want to have sex, I would start crying. And I can't remember exactly the kinds of things I would say, but it would be along the lines of like, you don't find me attractive, you don't love me. Yeah, that's coercion. That is not acceptable. That's me trying to convince my partner to show me that I have value by having sex with me, and that's not okay. That's coercive. And so instead, in that case, taking care of myself, working on my value, knowing that I am enough, whether my partner has sex with me or not, frees us up for my partner to actually be able to say yes or no, depending on what they want in that moment. And sure, there's some grief around that for me because I don't get to have as much sex as I want, but it makes it safer for everyone involved. And that is what matters. So, consent. If you want to know more about consent, there are two things that would be really, really good to check out. One is a video that you can find on YouTube called Consent is Like Tea, something like that. I'll find it and I'll put a link for you. But it's a very fun, lovely little metaphor that they use to describe what consent is. So watch that one, definitely. And then the other thing to watch if you're interested in kind of diving into consent, this one's a little bit more disturbing, but really good. It points out what happens with rape culture in the US in particular, but other Western places too. Really anywhere in the world this can happen. But this one is set in the US, and so it really focuses on that dynamic. It's called Promising Young Woman. It is a movie that came out, I think, in 2020, and it is hard to watch, but a really good watch. So consider watching that, and the Consent is Like Tea if you are still unclear about how to get true consent from a partner so that you know you're keeping them safe. Okay, the next principle is non-exploitation. What this means is you are not using your power as a way to coerce a person into being sexual with you. So in non-exploitation, it is possible that the person is saying yes, but they're saying yes because you have some kind of power over them. A great example of this would be back in 2017. There were allegations against Louis C.K. from 5 different women saying that he had some sexual misconduct with them. And he wrote a letter in response that is so well done. It is one of the best responses I've seen publicly of a person accepting, yes, I messed up. I did sexually abuse another person. I am sorry that this happened. I know I cannot make this right, but I want to apologize because I know it was wrong. Not very many people are accountable in that way. And so, Louis C.K., thank you for setting a wonderful example. But let me just read a couple of things that he said in the response that he wrote. First, he was saying, like, to the allegations, these stories are true. At the time, I said to myself that what I did was okay because I never showed a woman my dick without asking first. But what I learned later in life is that when you have power over another person, asking them to look at your dick isn't a question. It's a predicament for them. And what he goes on to say was, I was wielding my power irresponsibly. And by doing that, I hurt others. And I love this one piece that he says, the hardest regret to live with is what you've done to hurt someone else. And so in this case, the principle of non-exploitation is about asking yourself the question, am I in a power position here? Would it be exploitative of me to do a sexual thing with this person because they cannot actually give consent since they are in a lower power dynamic compared to me? Examples of this would be things like a therapist sleeping with a client. There is a reason why there are rules against that and why a person would lose their license if they did that, because there's a power differential in a client therapist relationship. The same is true with a doctor, the same is true with a lawyer, the same is true with a professor or a boss. Any of these examples, there is a difference in power, and that makes it to where the person with less power might feel like they have to say yes in order to keep their job, in order to make their boss happy, in order to get a good grade in school, whatever the case may be. Exploitation is also the reason why sex work is often looked at with a question. I know also there are some people who are completely against sex work. I am not actually one of those people, but there's the potential for exploitation if somebody has a resource that you need, money. And so even there is a possibility of exploitation. There's a possibility that this could be a very clean transaction that feels good to both parties, but there's no guarantee because there's the potential for exploitation whenever there's resources involved. That one usually confuses people a little bit. So the main thing to remember is, am I in a power position to where it makes it hard for this person to say no to the thing that I'm asking to do sexually? Might they feel obligated in some way to say yes? Okay, the next one is pretty straightforward, but let's talk about it. Protection from unwanted pregnancy and STIs. I remember there's another therapist who I met. He wrote the book Sexual Intelligence. His name is Marty Klein. The book Sexual Intelligence is awesome in case you want to read it. But his biggest pet peeve, the thing that he said he loses his mind about in the therapy world, is when people don't want to get pregnant, but they don't use any kind of contraceptive. And they're not doing family planning either. And I was like, yep, that's something that would peeve me off too. Is that a word? Peeve me off? I don't know. But there are many, many options for not getting pregnant, including all kinds of things like condoms, the pill, an IUD. There are shots now that you can get that will cause you to not be fertile during that time of the month. There are things that men can do, like vasectomies. There's spermicide. There's also, of course, family planning, although that one you have to be very careful. You have to be watching your body temperature and the days and counting your period and all of that. So that one takes a little bit more effort than the others, but there are so many options to keep you from getting pregnant. And sadly, we do not learn about them most of the time in school because we are a sex shaming culture. It is said that sex is bad. You just should not do it. Be abstinent. Like that works. And so people end up getting pregnant because they don't have all the information they need in order to protect themselves. Also, another myth that is told in our culture all the time is that condoms make sex not feel good. And to this I call BS. It is true that for some people, condoms might hurt, especially if there's like dryness involved and things like that. Or if you're just not a very sensitive person, yes. But for the majority of people, condoms do not make a big difference. It is a cultural message that most people have taken in, that condoms are annoying. And so they just repeat this to themselves without actually experiencing the fact that sex can be really pleasurable while using condoms. And also, that would protect you from a lot of other potential problems, not just unwanted pregnancy. But in the end, bringing a child into the world whenever you do not want them is not a kindness. And so protecting yourself from getting pregnant in whatever way works for you is ideal. And I think this is as much a person with a penis's responsibility as it is the person who would be carrying the baby. Everyone is responsible for asking the questions of like, how are we going to keep from getting pregnant? The next piece of this one, the protection from unwanted pregnancy and STIs, there are many, many ways to protect yourself from STIs. The most obvious one, and one that there's nothing wrong with, is solo sex. Solo sex, sex by yourself, can be extremely fun and satisfying. And it is one way to protect yourself from contracting something. Another thing would, of course, be condoms. Condoms do not protect against everything, but they definitely protect against any fluid transfer type STIs or STDs. So I'm thinking HIV, gonorrhea, chlamydia, those are the big ones. But it would not protect against things like HPV or genital warts. And it would also not protect against herpes necessarily, because you could have an outbreak in a place that the condom is not covering. And so you could still contract those things. Condoms are not fail-proof for all STIs, STDs, which is where conversations about when were you last tested comes into play. If you are a sexually active person who has multiple partners, you should be getting tested every 3 to 6 months. If you are meeting a new partner and you're thinking about being sexual with them, ask them to see their most recent results. Some people feel awkward about this, but thank goodness for communities that have really started to normalize this. I'm thinking about the kink community. I'm thinking about non-monogamous communities. They have really normalized this idea of just ask to see, when were your last test results? Can I see it? Not just hear from you, but actually see it. And I will show you mine as well. And is there anything else to talk about in this particular realm? I think the only thing to say, there's also tons of ways to treat STIs and STDs. There are some that are curable, things like gonorrhea, chlamydia, even syphilis, they can treat, and then it's not a problem. You have to continue getting tested because you could get it again, but once you've treated it, it is gone out of your system. HIV, there are antivirals that you can take, and you can have the same lifespan as a person without HIV. If you are someone who is having sex frequently and maybe in ways that are a little bit more risky for contracting HIV, so anal sex would be riskier than oral sex, then you can actually take an antiviral called PrEP, P-R-E-P, which makes it to where it is almost 100% effective against contracting HIV from a partner. So long as you're taking PrEP every single day, the likelihood of you getting it becomes almost zero. And then with other STIs, the ones that cannot be cured, HPV is an example of this, herpes is an example of this. Those actually, well, okay, HPV can be harmful. Thank God there's a product called Gardasil that you can take. It is a shot, and they offer it to young people, I think before age 11, or maybe at age 11. You can get it from your public health system because it can help protect you from cervical or penile cancer, because HPV can actually cause cancer. So getting Gardasil is a great way to help protect yourself. If you are under the age of 25, it is recommended that you get Gardasil still, even if you are sexually active. So that's one way you can protect against that. Herpes, right now, there is no way to protect against it. There is no way to cure it. And I can speak from experience because I have HSV2. I get herpes outbreaks on my vulva. It's really not the end of the world. It's a little bit uncomfortable if you have an outbreak. It feels like an ant bite. It's a little bit uncomfortable to tell new partners that you have it. But in the end, it is not a big deal. The problem is social stigma, not actual health concerns because of this STI. And so those are all the things I'll say about that one. Tons of ways to protect yourself, and it's important to protect yourself. I feel like this has gone on long. We're just gonna finish. I believe in us. Let's keep going. These are so important. Why stop? So the next one, honesty. This principle is about being honest with yourself and honest with partners. And when I think about this one, sure, there's all the honesty pieces around, like, have I been getting tested regularly for STIs? Am I telling my partners if I'm sleeping with other people? There's all of that. But there's also, like, am I telling my partners what would really turn me on? Or am I ashamed of the things that would turn me on and I hide it? Am I being honest with myself about what's really important to me in sexual relationships? Am I someone who's looking for romance, but I'm not saying that, and so I end up in one-night stands? This is honesty, being truly honest with yourself about, what do I want from my sexual life? What would bring me the most joy and pleasure and bliss in this lifetime? And then communicating that with the people you choose to have sex with. There's a wonderful book in philosophy called Radical Honesty. And their main idea is, if you are honest, if you are truly honest with others, you can get through anything. And I believe there's truth to that. I think about another quote, who I cannot remember who said it right now, which is a bummer, but it's something along the lines of, nothing human is foreign to me. Every part of humanity I can be in relationship to, I can have empathy for, I can understand, because I am human. There is nothing that I cannot comprehend, because we are all related and connected. I'll try and think of who says it and what the quote actually says, but right now it's just like a fuzzy memory that I'm sharing. But yeah, honesty, being truly honest about, here's what's going on inside of me around sexuality. Will you tell me what's going on inside of you? The next one would be shared values. And with this, it's really about, are we in alignment with what we're wanting in our sex life? So if one person, their value is, when I have sex, that means that I am deeply in love and I have met my life partner. And another person's value around sex is, cool, Tuesday night, let's get down. I don't know why it came out that way, but that's how it came out. So one person's like life partner and the other person's like, yeah, let's fuck. They do not have the same values. They probably should not be having sex, because it's going to cause emotional pain. And so recognizing, what are my values around sex? What does it mean to me to be sexual kissing, to be sexual having intercourse, to be sexual having anal sex? What do each of these things mean to me? And are we in alignment together? At least close enough? Are our values overlapping enough that when we are sexual together, it's not going to cause emotional pain for either person? And then the final one would be mutual pleasure. Are we engaging in sex in a way that we both genuinely enjoy it, that we're both getting something from it that brings us value and excitement and turn on and joy? And when it comes to these 6 sexual principles, the reason that Doug Braun-Harvey talks about them as principles is because they are ideals. There is no set answer of, this is what it means to be honest in sex. This is what it means to have mutual pleasure. Like, everyone's going to be a little bit different. Maybe for one person, being honest in sex means, I feel comfortable telling you everything about what I'm into, what I'd like to do with you, but I'm actually not comfortable telling you about all my previous sexual partners. That doesn't feel good to me. That's beyond what I think is honest sharing, and instead is more about just like digging into somebody's history. I'm just giving you an example. Who knows? Maybe somebody really values sharing all of their past sexual relationships, and that would feel like great honesty to them. And that's the whole point of what I'm getting at now. There is an ideal of absolute honesty, absolute shared values, absolute mutual pleasure. I think there is an ideal about absolute consent, even though consent can get a little tiny bit fuzzy at times in some relationships that are working really, really hard to be consensual, and yet a person realizes, like, oh shoot, I said yes to this thing, but I really didn't want that thing. I wanted this thing instead. Like, consent can get a little bit challenging because words are imperfect and we're all doing our best. But I think consent should be like gold standard. Make sure you're getting a clear, enthusiastic yes. And if not an enthusiastic yes, then a clear, I know that I'm saying yes to something out of love and tenderness and not purely body turn on. Cool. Okay. Awesome. Still consent. So that one's gold standard. Non-exploitation, that one's pretty clear. We should have a gold standard of like, try really, 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 really hard not to exploit. Be very clear about where you have power and don't take advantage of people from that place. And then protection from unwanted pregnancies and STIs. Again, it's like an ideal. Don't bubble wrap yourself and never ever have sex with anyone because you're terrified. No. Think about what would work best in your life. Talk to your partners. Come up with the thing that is going to be most suitable for you in your sexual world. It does not have to look exactly like someone else. Thankfully, there are many ways to be sexually safe. And it's about finding what works for you and living towards your highest principle in each one of these different categories. Whew. We did it. That was a long one. But it was fun and essential. It is very important to talk about sexual health, and we did it. Good job, you. I don't think there's anything else I want to say about these 6 principles. I'll probably revisit them in the future, but for this introduction video, that's all. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.